Madam President, I come to the floor today to talk about something that is clearly on the minds of the people of my home state of Wyoming and people all across the country, and it's the high cost of gasoline. And filled up on Sunday evening in Wyoming, and on Monday morning on the way to the airport, I noticed that the price of gasoline in Wyoming was 10 cents higher per gallon than it was Sunday night when I filled the tank. I'm heading back this weekend to Wyoming, actually later today, and we'll see what the cost of a gallon of gasoline will be. And I know absolutely that the price of diesel fuel is much higher, almost by $1 a gallon, to the price of regular unleaded gasoline. And I think it really is something that is happening all across the country, because even in this morning's New York Times, Thursday, March 1st, 2012, above the fold, front page headline, "Tensions Raise Specter of Gas at $5 a Gallon." New York Times front page. Gasoline for $5 a gallon, they ask as a question. The possibility is hardly far-fetched. It goes on to say, with no clear end to tensions with Iran and Syria and rising demand from countries like China, gas prices are already at record highs for the winter months. It goes on, averaging $4.32 in California, $3.73 a gallon nationally on Wednesday, according to the AAA's daily fuel gauge report. It goes on to say, as summer approaches, demand for gasoline rises, typically pushing prices up. No clear end to tensions in Iran and Syria, and rising demand from countries like China. Well, it's interesting because obviously China is the country who told Canada, the Prime Minister from Canada recently, we'll buy all that extra oil that you have that apparently the President of the United States isn't interested in, as he continues to block the Keystone XL pipeline. And that's what the American public is facing today: rising gasoline prices and an administration that continues to block access to important source of safe, secure energy, as opposed to continuing to spend and send so much money overseas. So here we are, high gasoline prices continuing to cause additional hardships for American families and American businesses. When families pay more at the pump, it impacts the quality of their life. For people and families dealing with bills, with mortgage, with kids, it's clearly less money available to deal with those things as they continue to see the money going to fill the tank. This also hurts economic growth. It hurts our ability to create jobs. When companies pay more for gasoline, they also have less money to expand their businesses, less money to create new jobs. Wyoming families and Wyoming businesses know this all too well, because in Wyoming we drive longer distances than most Americans do. The President also knows that this impacts the economy, and that's why he continues to give speeches on energy. It's clear that the President is defensive on this issue, and it's understandable, because the average price of gasoline, of regular unleaded gasoline, the day he became president, well, today it's 103% higher. It's over double what it was the day that President Obama took office just 3 years ago. Price of gasoline, 103% higher than the day President Obama took office. Now, there are a lot of factors at play. What I do know, and what this does show, is that the President's policies are at best ineffectual, and at worst are contributing to the higher gas prices. People on both sides of the aisle are knowing this, they're hearing it at home, and this week actually one Senate Democrat wrote to the Obama administration and he pointed this out. Specifically, he pointed out that these are, quote, the highest prices we have ever seen for this time of year. Unfortunately, that Senate Democrat's solution is to request that Saudi Arabia produce more oil. And I'll repeat that. His solution is to have the Secretary of State ask Saudi Arabia to produce more oil. And of course, the President is also considering other proposals as well. And like asking Saudi Arabia to produce more oil, the President's ideas would put our national security at risk. And there I'm referring to the President's threat to tap the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. This would be the second time that President Obama has tapped the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Prior to the President's decision to do that last June, well, it had only been tapped twice for emergencies since 1975. So between 1975 and 2011, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve had only been tapped twice for emergencies. It was tapped in 1991 upon the outbreak of the Persian Gulf War, and then again, more recently, following Hurricane Katrina. In both of these instances, we're talking about actual supply disruption. However, when President Obama tapped the reserve last year, there was no substantial prospect of a supply disruption. The decision was based on politics, as would be the decision this time. That's why Jay Leno recently, earlier this week, during his nightly television show, called the Strategic Petroleum Reserve President Obama's strategic re-election reserve. A number of my colleagues, and I think there are others, that think that there are other ways to address high gasoline prices. We understand that the Strategic Petroleum Reserve is for emergencies, not political disasters. And it's interesting because just earlier today, the House Minority Leader, Nancy Pelosi, endorsed tapping the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Not because of an emergency, not because of a crisis and supply disruption, but, she says, to combat rising gas prices. There is only so much energy, so much oil in the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. The amount that was taken back last year was never put back in to fill the tank. The amount that was taken out last year was sold. That money, if you use that money to fill the tank back up, not enough. Almost $1 billion more this year to fill the tank than what they got for selling what they took out last year. So we have a tank at the Strategic Petroleum Reserve that is not full, still waiting to be filled from what was taken from it last year, and now here we are a year later, and the President, as well as Nancy Pelosi, is considering tapping the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, drawing down again, making us that much more vulnerable in case of a true emergency. Well, the President actually has some options that make a lot of sense to a lot of Americans. And that option, of course, is to increase American energy production. The President can begin to follow through on his words from Miami just a week or so ago. He said, "I will do whatever I can to develop every source of American energy." The President can provide more access to federal lands and federal waters. This week, we learned that the oil and gas production on federal public lands and public waters is down. In 2011, there was a 14% decrease in oil production on public lands and waters from 2010. Less energy produced on federal lands and waters. And an 11% decrease in gas production from 2010. So oil production is down, gas production is down. In Miami, the President said that he was, quote, he has, quote, directed my administration to look at every single area where we can make an impact and help consumers in the months ahead, including, he said, permitting. Again, the President needs to follow through on his words. The President can begin by increasing the number of permits issued by for development in the Gulf of Mexico. I understand that the administration has issued only 21 permits so far this year. In 2010, the administration has issued 32 permits at this time. The President can also increase access to other offshore areas. He can provide access to offshore areas in the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans, not just the Gulf of Mexico. You know, in November, the President proposed an offshore leasing plan that excluded the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. What kind of offshore leasing plan is that? He excluded areas off the coast of Virginia, even though both senators and the governor of Virginia supported such energy exploration? The president said no. The president can also increase access to onshore areas. The president can open up areas in Alaska, and he can support proposals to open up ANWR. Both senators from Alaska, one Republican, one Democrat, and the governor of Alaska strongly support opening up ANWR for exploration. The president should too. The president should also take steps to facilitate onshore exploration in the West. Specifically, he should scrap new regulations requiring what's called master leasing and development plans. These regulations were put into place over 2 years ago by the Secretary of Interior. It's unclear why the Secretary issued such regulations. They add more red tape, they cause more bureaucratic delay, and they slow down American energy production. Now, of course, there are other regulations that drive up the cost of American energy, specifically the EPA's forthcoming Tier 3 regulations, which will affect America's refineries. A recent study shows that this rule could increase the cost of manufacturing gasoline, which will add to what Americans are paying at the pump and will add to the pain at the pump. It could also raise the operating cost for refineries by anywhere from $5 billion to $13 billion a year. It could force as many as 7 U.S. refineries to shut down, and it could lead to a 7 to 14% reduction in gasoline supplies for American refineries. These policies by this administration are completely unacceptable. The president should, at the very least, delay the issuance of this current rule. In addition to providing more access to federal lands and federal waters and eliminating burdensome regulations, the president should follow through on his words, and address what he called delivery bottlenecks. Well, specifically, he should address the bottlenecks that the Keystone XL pipeline would relieve. I'm referring to 100,000 barrels of oil a day that the pipeline would be able to ship from Montana and North Dakota. That's right, we're talking about homegrown American energy. Of course, the president ought to approve the Keystone XL pipeline coming in from Canada, but it's North American oil from Canada, but specific and significant amounts of oil, 100,000 barrels a day from Montana and North Dakota. Right now, there isn't sufficient pipeline capacity out of North Dakota and Montana. They're shipping the oil on trucks and trains, and that is much more expensive than shipping it by pipeline. Approving the Keystone XL pipeline is an easy decision, and the president should make this decision immediately. Now, it was interesting today to see in Politico, one of the local papers here on Capitol Hill, an article with the headline, Bill Clinton, quote, embrace Keystone XL. Bill Clinton, the first sentence, Bill Clinton says it is time to build the Keystone XL pipeline. Perhaps President Obama ought to listen to President Clinton. Finally, the president says there are no silver bullets. Well, it doesn't mean that the president should sit on the sidelines. Doesn't mean his only options are asking Saudi Arabia to boost production or opening up the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. The president needs to promote American energy production. He can eliminate costly regulations, and he can approve the Keystone XL pipeline. Those are the steps that the president needs to take, and he needs to do that in the very near future, because I believe, Madam President, that we're going to continue to see headlines like the ones in today's New York Times. Tensions raise specter of gas at $5 a gallon. With that, Madam President, I appreciate your time, and I yield the floor.